There are 4 definitions of monopoly which we commonly see more or less confusedly applied in textbooks, in the financial press, in parliamentary debates, in conversations on the street, etc. The first definition of monopoly is very loose, clumsy and misleading. It holds that monopoly exists when a company, quote-unquote, controls its price. What does this mean? It means that in a market economy, everyone is free to ask whatever he wishes for his goods and services, and rightly so. But watch out. I may be absolute lord and master of what I asked for my goods and services, but that may be totally irrelevant, because for a deal to be closed, the other party must be willing to accept the price I ask. And if the other party is not willing, the deal or exchange will not ultimately be closed, nor will a market price be set. I could say to you, listen, I am such a good economics professor that each hour of economics I teach costs €1,000,000 per student. It would be within my right. Either you pay me €1,000,000 or there's no class. What would be the result of that? There would be no class, all right? So, the idea that each company controls its price, be careful. It does and it doesn't. It does in the sense that each is quite free to ask the price desired, but it doesn't in the sense that in two-sided competition, in an environment of contractual ties and voluntary exchanges, an entrepreneur cannot force others to be willing to fall into line and pay his price. So that first very clumsy definition is of no use to us. It is not operational. It is a confusing definition. Well, we already know that in the market, prices are set by the subjective valuations of the marginal pairs. There must always be 2 parties, a buyer and a seller, who act voluntarily, because in doing so, they always come out ahead. Each one believes he or she benefits. I could be Julia Roberts and say, look, it'll cost you €100,000 to spend the night with me. And the guy could say, well, listen, in that case, nothing doing. In the end, the deal is closed at €2,000 or at €1,000, which is sufficient. But the parties act voluntarily. Physical violence is neither used nor threatened. The second definition of monopoly is the etymological definition. Monopoly comes from the Greek monos, which means single, one, and polein, which means to sell. Monopoly. A state of monopoly is said to exist when there is only one seller of a good in the market. This is the second definition, and it rests on a false concept, as our analysis in recent classes has shown. It is a static definition. It is based on taking a photograph, selecting an arbitrary frame from the social process, and focusing on whether, at that moment, there is only one seller of a good, or there is not only one seller of a good. By the way, when I ask you for definitions of monopoly, you must provide a summary of the entire comparative analysis we have made up to this point. Add to that the following. Notice, the static definition is that monopoly exists if there is only one seller of a good in a sector or an industry. But I ask you, and please write this down, what is the definition of a good, a sector, and an industry? Because a state of monopoly will or will not exist depending on how you define the sector or the industry. To what sector or industry does Coca-Cola belong? If we are restrictive enough, Coca-Cola will have a monopoly. If we define the sector as soft drinks, which are dark, carbonated colas, advertised with, in the end, only Coca-Cola will be left in this sector. If we define the sector of Professor Huerta de Soto as political economy department heads between the ages of 50 and 55, who are Spanish members of the Austrian school, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7, teach the group of audiovisual communication students at the Universidad Rey Juan Carlos, then damn, I'm a monopolist. Do you see what I'm saying? And is it possible to define a sector totally objectively? which is the sine qua non for being able to determine whether a state of monopoly exists in static terms? The answer is no, because the definition of a good depends on the subjective appreciation of consumers. Let's take Coca-Cola, for example. If Coca-Cola buys Pepsi-Cola, does it acquire a monopoly and become the only seller? No, because the sector is actually broader than that. When I drink a Coke, what am I doing? I am quenching my thirst, right? And if I don't want to buy a Coke, I can have a Tri Naranjos, or a glass of mineral water, Solan de Cabras. So the sector broadens, and it is always possible to expand a sector or an industry in such a way that there is no monopolist. Let's talk about singers. Raphael. My grandmother used to say, there never was another like him. She was in love with Raphael. In her view, Raphael held a monopoly on singing, because in subjective terms, to her, Raphael was the only singer there was. But in reality, if we get tired of Raphael, we also have Julio Iglesias and 1,000 others. So, to all we have said about the incorrect conceptualization, about defining monopoly in static terms instead of in the dynamic terms of whether or not there is free access to entrepreneurship, we must add the problem of the impossibility of unambiguously defining the concept of sector or industry. Since that definition of sector or industry depends on subjective appreciation, we cannot use an objective criterion discernible to an outside observer and applicable in scientific terms to a supposed regulation of monopoly, for example. But, I repeat, the crucial argument is not this one. The crucial argument is that it is absurd for us to consider an isolated frame and focus on whether or not there is only one seller. We must see the succession of frames that make up the movie. And the crucial point is whether or not there is free access to entrepreneurship in all areas of the market. If there is, then there is competition, regardless of whether in some isolated moment a sole offerer predominated. And if that is the case, rather than a sign of consumer exploitation, it indicates precisely that by best serving consumers, an offerer temporarily gained predominance. But watch out. I repeat, in the market, each day is a new beginning. We cannot rest on our laurels, and if that offerer does not continue, prospectively, to constantly search for the best way to satisfy consumers with the best product of the best characteristics at the lowest price, thousands of potential competitors will immediately come out of the woodwork like termites and threaten her predominance. Unless Papa State comes along wielding all its coercive, systematic power and by force blocks access to entrepreneurship.